Nigeria is home to some of the wealthiest Africans who are expanding and solidifying their grip on several industries, and many of them jealously and actively protect their investments. This manifests in the manner in which they respond when a Nigerian startup announces funding from a local investor, that being those wealthy Nigerians. It's most likely a debt to be repaid within 2 years and not in return for equity in the company. This means that no bank or enterprise, or few banks and few enterprises, are ever ready to roll in big funds as investments for startups in the country. So joining me in the studio is tech consultant Taiwo Oyewole to discuss this and more. Taiwo, you are welcome to the Global Business Report, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here.
Fantastic, fantastic. So there was a bit of research put out by TechPoint where they were looking at the amount of investments that had come in to Nigeria with respects to funding. I believe if you compare 2018 to 2019, we saw almost a double. It doubled. So $178 million or so in 2018, yes, versus 378 in 2019.
Correct.
However, $2 million or so of that was from the locals, our own people here. Which we have the richest man in Africa in this country, yeah? 95%. 20. We went from 2 million in 2018 to 20 million ahead.
2019.
However, 95% of the pie, foreign investors. Help us out. You talk to these people. Why aren't the locals? Yeah, there we go. We have our chart up there for our viewers now, the year-on-year funding. It went from 87% 2018 to 94%. That's the share of the pie of which funding source came from the foreign folks. So what's going on with the locals? Why don't we see more of this?
I mean, the first thing is the currency.
Okay.
50,000 naira and $50,000 are not the same.
Massive difference.
Yes, massive difference. Same digits, but once you insert the currencies in front of them, the symbols, and that's it.
Right.
It just changes the game completely.
Okay.
You hear stories from founders where they tell you, keep jumping from one bike to the other, trying to beat traffic when Okadas were still allowed.
Right.
In Lagos, you know.
Right.
Trying to meet an investor to get them to fund their business. And they're doing several series of meetings, you know, and nothing comes out of it for months. And then they take a trip across the pond, you know, to wherever.
Yes.
And what?
They're
20, 30 minutes?
Yes.
And they have a $100,000, $200,000 check, and that's it. So there's a propensity to give. Like somebody described it, one of the investors. He said that the propensity for the networks to keep giving, from the foreign investors is a lot more than from the local investors. We don't have the kind of funds that they have, and because they have huge funds, they can play a lot with, so they can say, look, we'll allocate X amount, just a small percentage.
But their X to them, respectively, is larger for the locals, yeah?
Probably much larger than what obtains locally, or what we have appetite for locally.
Right.
So. If somebody's closed a company or maybe sold a company for $300 million and then decides to set up a fund of $100 million out of that $300 million and then says, oh, Africa, some people are coming from Africa and so on and so forth. And then he earmarks what? 20 million? Mm-hmm. So everybody goes to collect a share of that 20 million.
That 20 million.
You know, and there's several of them because it's like that, it's just that, I mean, there's more cash to play with.
Okay. More cash, so deeper pockets.
Yes.
What about, I want to get your thoughts on this, patient capital. From what I hear, and you would know more of this than I would, the foreign investors with the deeper pockets that you've already mentioned, seem to be more patient to wait to see how the funds that they're investing in, the tech startup, will develop. Whereas the locals are like, Oga, you have to turn this thing around in 3 months or 2 months.
So there are a few reasons. Number one, again, alluding to the first reason again, they've got deeper pockets. So if you have deeper pockets, you can wait a longer time, which means you're not pressed for cash. The second reason is that there's a short-termism in our markets and environment here. We don't necessarily plan long-term. Even government doesn't really plan long-term. They might have them on paper, but in terms of actualization, things change. So simple thing, I mean, social, political factors, for example. Okay. A new government comes in, everybody goes into panic mode. So everything is usually tied to one in most cases, tied to one government in power or the other one or the next one. So nobody's really hedging there. There are very few people, few organizations that hedge their bets against the real indices of an economic growing.
Yes.
So the local investors are looking at that and saying, look, we would rather put our cash in things like real estate that they would weather the storm through the years, through whatever regimes happen or regime changes take place. They put them in government bonds that the government is bound
backed by
federal government,
right.
And they will pay. Another money market instruments that generally might be higher risk, but over time, things like stock exchange, they can put in their money and take it out as as things happen like that, and or even go across the pond and buy, the euro bonds or buy stocks in some of the other blue chip companies overseas like that, as opposed to investing in a startup whose future you're not really sure
about whether they'll last.
Whether they'll last or not, because even the established enterprises that we have are trying to reinvent themselves for the future ahead of them. So look at our banking system, our financial system. We see that our banks are trying to capture the younger market.
Right.
And there's only one reason, because at a particular time, a lot of them realized that, especially for the older generation banks, that their customer base were
shrinking.
I wouldn't say shrinking, but they realized that the average age of their average age of their customers was above a certain threshold, and that at a certain point in time,
you have to switch to younger. Yes, polite way of I get it. I'm sure the viewers get it as well, right?
So at that point in time, I mean, hey.
You have to find a newer, younger.
But so
right.
they needed to reinvent themselves and capture the new audience who were essentially the future of their businesses.
Right.
So, and it's tough for them. It's a tough thing for them to do, to be honest. So we have a lot of organizations that are struggling and they're already established. They've got capital, they've got a customer base, and they've got experience behind them, they've got a good heritage behind them. They're struggling to reinvent themselves, so which is why we're now seeing the models. Initially, when a lot of startups came out, they were more focused on B2C, trying to meet the needs of the end consumers. But our B2C market isn't as developed as we think that it is, and especially with, because then again, you say tech.
What does tech mean?
What does tech mean?
What is tech?
Number one, exactly. So number two, you need things like internet, you need things like power. You need the kind of hardware or devices you need to use, the kind of phones that you'll be able to power some of the things. So we've grown, significantly, but there's still a lot. And that's why you see a lot of startups pivoting more towards the B2B model that can guarantee some sort of revenue, for you. Because if you're selling to somebody who already has an existing customer base, who already has business challenges, and you're meeting their needs at that point in time, there's a corollary effect because they can serve their own customers better, and ultimately, it helps you, and you stay alive in business, And then if at the end you now decide you want to do a B2C leg of your own business, you're not struggling to survive anymore because you already have that base to work with and stuff to pull through, and that makes. But again, just to address, the two critical things: the short-termism in our market and the fact that we don't have such deep pockets to be able to just to weather the storm. So a startup comes to you and says, "Oh, we want to raise $10 million, we want to raise $20 million," and then you go ahead and give them $20 million. That's 7.2 billion naira. Right. And then tell you equity, and then they tell you after the first 3 years, "Oh, we're not able to pay any dividends."
Right.
You're beginning to get it.
Exactly.
But $20 million to somebody who has a $500 million, $1 billion war chest.
Peanuts.
Means nothing.
So they can risk it.
They can.
We need a deeper market. All right, let me get to this Partech report. Partech, I believe, is a San Francisco-based company. They were looking at, did a report 2019 as far as tech startups and the kind of investment flows that came in. And I'm showing here that, let's see now, African tech startups reached a new symbolic milestone with 2.2 billion raised in equity funding, 74% year-on-year growth. Now, from what I'm showing, Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, and Kenya, we look at the quartet. That's the quartet that generated most of this equity funding that came in?
85% to be precise.
85%, thank you very much. How encouraged are you by the fund flows? I think Nigeria led the way with the overall amount that came in ahead. We have a sector breakdown there where most of these funds, how encouraged are you with what you've seen from their reports as far as where the funds are flowing in the countries and so on and so forth?
So, I mean, this, I think, takes the TechPoint report a bit further, which is, I think that report was referencing something from Disrupt Africa.
Right.
But this takes it a bit further. Excuse me. And they actually stated here that the amount is actually higher than $2.2 billion. Because
some were disclosed, some were
undisclosed, and so on. So there might be more that isn't there. But it's quite exciting that we're getting these volumes of this amount of cash into the African space. But it's also a bit worrying that 4 countries account for
with how many?
54 states. 54
yeah.
states.
Yeah.
Only 4 countries account for 85% of it.
Right.
With Nigeria taking 36% of the total.
Yeah.
It says a lot. However,
yes.
That's in terms of the value of the transactions. When it comes to the count of the transactions, South Africa actually leads the way.
Okay. With the number of deals.
With the number of deals.
Okay.
So for example, Nigeria had...
Yes, I think it was 37% or so.
Yeah, so we had 37% of the total value.
Right.
But the number of deals, what it means is that they might have had more companies that were funded,
right?
But the average funding size was smaller.
Okay, but we need more time to discuss this. I gotta have you back. So I have a minute to go here. I want to get your outlook real quick as far as how you see things. We've got the coronavirus, we've got things being affected now here in Africa. As far as funding going into Africa going forward, do you still think these 4 are going to maintain their grip, or other countries could possibly come in?
I think for the nearest future, yes. There are emerging comers like Kigali and Rwanda.
Yes.
Ghana is showing some promise, and others within the East African belt as well. There is some promise there. So I'm optimistic, but I think that the quartet will still maintain the lead across board, with Nigeria doing that. And it's not really far-fetched. Statistically speaking, we have more volume. Our population is more than most of the other countries. So that's...
We're going to have you back. Taiwo Oyewole, thank you so much. Tech consultant here in Nigeria.